Hello and welcome to this video about Apper for SharePoint brought to you by Flowcision. My name is Eugene Jones, and in this video I'll show how Apper can modernize your existing SharePoint apps using Nintex Automation, also known as K25. Let's start with some background. Today there are hundreds of Nintex customers relying on Nintex for SharePoint to automate their internal business processes. On April 2nd of next year, Microsoft will remove SharePoint 2013 workflow from all on-premise instances of SharePoint, thereby leaving these apps in an invalid and broken state. If you need to stay on-premises, then Nintex Automation, also known as K25, is a powerful alternative that provides a true automation platform with flexible capabilities and features. Building workflows in K2 is intuitive and fast, and apps built for SharePoint 2016 and 2019 is cloud-ready and can be moved to Office 365. K2 allows cloning and reusing of assets as an easy way to accelerate development. As much as I love K2 and enjoy working on the platform, it does have some challenges. Specifically, the learning curve tends to be long and is often cited as being complex, and creating forms can be time-consuming. Between 40% and 60% of the project effort is typical. But Apper can help to bridge these gaps by providing an intuitive wizard to let users define the form layout and its controls, then use authoring to create forms in minutes or hours, not days. Apper provides consistent results by using proven methodology and patterns that follows best practices for building apps in K2. And finally, Apper produces fully functional forms that are ready to be finalized using K2 Designer. Here is a quick demo for creating forms for a SharePoint app using Apper. We start our demo in SharePoint where I've created two SharePoint lists, namely Claim Info and Expenses. And I'm going to use these two SharePoint lists to create a very simple expense claim request app using Apper. In the Claim Info list, I'm going to click on Application. And you can see that the only artifacts that exist for this SharePoint list is the two smart objects that were generated by K2 when the integration between K2 and this list was established. This is the only supported way to create that integration. Next, we'll move over to Apper, and we'll start by specifying we want to create a SharePoint app and providing the URL to the site in SharePoint where the lists are located, and then telling Apper where to deploy the assets that gets generated for this app. Next, we need to specify a form template. Apper provides a library of form templates that can be used. For this app, we're going to use the new edit and display template, which means that Apper will generate 3 different forms for this app. We'll give the forms a name and a description before moving over to the next page, which is views. Think of views as the different SharePoint lists that you want to add to your form. For this app, we have 2 SharePoint lists, namely Claim Info and Expenses, and we'll add them now to our form. Click on Add. You can see that create a new view from an existing smart object has already been selected, and all we have to do now is to go and search for that Claim Info smart object that was generated for the list. Once the smart object is found, we can select it and say OK. Next, we need to provide the ID of the SharePoint list. This is needed for integration. The next step is to select the template for the view. We're going to use an item view with 4 columns. And lastly, we can provide our view with a description. Next is the data source. We know it is SharePoint, and it will go and find the smart object that we selected in the previous section. Right, we're all done. We hit submit. And now we can add one more view for the expenses list. So once again, we can go and search for the smart object, select it and OK. Provide the ID to the SharePoint list and select the template. For this template, we're going to do a list view with a pop-up. And once again, provide our view with a description. Let's wait for the data source to be configured. Okay, everything is done. We can hit submit, and we have added our 2 views to our form. Next is the data piece. These are the fields that we want to show on each one of those views. Let's start with the claim info list, and we're going to click add from smart object. On the left hand side, you can see all the columns for the claim info list in SharePoint. I want to add employee, notes, and total amount to my view to display to the user. The rest of the information is not important to me, so I can click on OK. Once I have added the fields to my view, I can now go and configure them to specify things like the control type I want to display and whether or not it is required. So let's do that. Start with employee, and we're gonna mark employee field as required and change the control type to people picker so that we can search for people in SharePoint, and hit submit. Next, we're gonna move notes down. We want that control to be last, and configure total amount. Once again, we want total amount to be required, and we're going to change the data type to currency. All looks good for the claim info list. Let's switch over to the expenses list and add the fields that we want to show on the view. We're going to add amount, claim info ID, customer expense, date, and expense type. And once again, we can now go and configure these fields. We're going to start with expense type, specify that is the first control on the view. It is required, and we want to use a drop-down control for this field. To populate the drop-down, we're going to go and select another smart object called expense type. Click on OK, and then we just need to complete the configuration for our drop-down control and hit submit. The next field is amount. Change that to 2. We also want this field to be required. Text box is fine. We're going to change the data type to currency. Next is date. Make that third control. It's also required, and we want to change the data type to be a date only. Next is customer expense. In the SharePoint column, this is a yes/no field, but instead of using a boring text box, we're going to change it to a toggle control, which looks like the 2 toggle controls that you can see here on the screen. These toggle controls are only provided through Flowsession. I'm going to hit submit. And then finally, we're going to do claim info ID. Claim info ID will be used by Apple as a relationship between the claim info view and the expenses view, which means that Apple will use this field when it creates the view, the rules for the view, and the forms to make sure that data is saved appropriately between the 2 lists and that data integrity is preserved. We can change this control to a reference to another view, change the data type, and say the parent view is claim info, and submit. Everything looks good on the data side. Let's move over to the last page, which is the workflow. Apple provides 4 different workflow templates. For this app, we're going to use the 2-level approval with rework. And once again, we're going to give our workflow a name. and a description. And move on next to the last tab, which is the summary that shows the information about the app that we're about to deploy. Everything looks good, so I'm going to go ahead and click submit. And at this point, Apper is now using the information that we provided to go and generate the artifacts for our app in SharePoint. Deployment was successful, so once I click OK here, it will navigate me to the SharePoint site. And if I go to claim info now, and once again go to application, you can see the forms, the views, and the workflow that was generated for this app. I can now configure this list to use those new forms. And now my app is ready to be used. So I'm going to go to claim info, and I'm going to add a new item. Now the form that was generated will be loaded here and allow me to capture information. Okay, here is my new form. I can go and search for an employee. Let's put in a total amount is a demo, and let's go add some expenses to this request. Let's do one for airfare. And here you can see that toggle control. Let's add one more. For hotel. Alright, my expense claim looks good. I can now go ahead and submit. This will create the data entries in the two SharePoint lists and then start my K2 workflow. Here you can see the entry that was created for claim info and its corresponding entries in expenses. This is the end of our demo. Here are some of the benefits that Apper provides. First and most importantly, customer can reduce the cost and effort to migrate apps to K2 by up to 60%. Next, users don't need to be an expert in K2 to use Apper. Its patterns and methodologies were designed to simplify the learning curve for K2. Apper embraces reusability. User can create forms that uses existing views and/or smart objects. Apper is not just for SharePoint. Users can generate forms for SQL, Smartbox, or any other line of business system. And finally, Apper provides the unique capability for creating forms using a UX-first approach. Simply design your form and Apper will create the underlying data storage components for you. Over to commercials. Apper is not sold as a product, but is a tool that will be gifted to customers that sign on for projects with a duration of 80 hours or more. Apper is provided as is, and its maintenance and support terms are as follows. Any defects discovered during the project will be remedied free of charge. After the project concludes, a complimentary maintenance period of 30 days will be provided. Any maintenance after this period may be charged. Precision provides free proof of concept demos to prospective customers. Note that Apper only works on Nintex Automation 5.8. Finally, be on the lookout for a new feature coming soon, the ability to import Nintex for SharePoint form packages into Apper. You can contact me for more information or for a demo using the details on your screen. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope to hear from you soon.